Alright, so I'm going to start working on assembling the power steering cylinder for the tractor. And just so nobody asks, this is just a white epoxy primer. These are gray. I just ran out of gray. So that's all there is there. A couple of things I'm going to go ahead and mention. The cylinder itself. This cylinder, when I bought it, the rod had a big rust spot on it. About halfway down, I'm guessing, where just the hose is rubbed on it. So I sent this out to a hydraulic shop. They took and cut this open, and you can kind of see their welds here. Took this tube off and remade the new rod for me. Put it all back, tested it and everything. The only downside is they kind of put the wrong thread on here, which what's there should work. It's just kind of a irritation to me, but you know, it is what it is. The second thing, I had this new spool valve made. This was a very expensive piece because it had to be hardened and then machined while it was hardened. But as you can see, the old valve is pretty badly rusted. And something else on this valve, the original, you have one side that is a 9/16 and the other side is a half. Well, the seals that go on the sides, this bore, I want to say, was 1 1/16 inch. The outside diameter of this seal is 1 1/16 inch. Well, the inside was a 9/16. So I made the machine shop make this valve to be 9/16 on both sides. So the seal that's on this end with the 1/2 inch is going to be a proprietary seal. And that seal you can only get through your New Holland dealer. And the last time I looked, a couple years ago, these two seals plus the 2 O-rings that go here cost $75. I spent almost $400 on this valve. So I made them do that, and then I bought these seals for about $2 each. So that was my logic behind that. And it should not affect the operation. The only difference is I had to come in here and drill out one of the retainers to accept the bigger valve stud. So that's kind of it on the little nuances that's going on here. And luckily the machine shop I took this to actually specializes in spool valves, so they matched the valve to the housing, so it should work just great. Alright, so to start assembly on this, I'm going to lube everything with this John Deere Molly grease. You don't have to use the John Deere grease, but use a Molly grease. So first piece we're going to start with is going to be the sleeve and flange assembly. And we're going to take the ball stud retainer. We're going to put some grease down into it. This thing has a grease fitting, and you know it'll all get greased, but just go ahead and add some right now during assembly. Speaking of that grease fitting, make sure it is not installed yet. Go ahead and take one of these ball stud seats. Go ahead and get it greased up. take it and slide it down into the retainer. Now take that retainer and go ahead and slide it into the assembly. Now, the next thing you need to do is go ahead and put in this upper bolt, because once you put the ball stud in here, you cannot get this bolt in. So we're going to take the bolt with the lock washer, go ahead and slide that in. And we'll take the stud, we'll go ahead and grease it up. To get the stud in, I'm going to go in through the large opening here on the side, slide it in there, and then just kind of like twist it and pivot it up. Next, we'll take the other seat retainer, or not retainer, this is just the other seat, and we're going to slide it into the retainer. Just like so. Next we have a spring. Then we have this little stop plunger. Let's go ahead and grease it all up. And add a little bit out here on the end. And then that'll slide into the spring. And then we can kind of slide this back a little bit to see what we're going to do for the next step. I probably should have showed you this outside of the housing, but it just didn't dawn on me. You can see a notch here in the retainer. That is where this pin is going to go. Well, that pin is going to go through one of these holes in this piece. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take this bolt, and this is a special bolt, so do not break this bolt. We're going to slide that down in to, well, they're referring to this. They're calling this a stop screw. Well, we're going to take this stop screw. I'm going to put a little bit of grease on these threads just to help it turn in a little easier. So all this stuff's covered in grease anyway once you grease it, so it doesn't much matter where you get grease. But we're going to thread this into this retainer. And we're going to thread it until we can line up one of those holes. Turn this around so I can use my other hand here in a minute. Okay. Okay, and once you get it tightened as tight as you can get it, you basically have this stud now locked, which you don't want. You want that stud to be able to pivot just a little bit. So now you need to back this off till you can line up the hole. And I know this is very difficult to see. I have that stud or that hole lined up. Now I'm going to turn this center stud to line up everything. And I'm going to drop that pin in. Now, if you're like me, that pin broke. And so I had to buy some new pins, which they're 1/8 by 1 3/8 inches is what I could find. It's 1/8 inch too long, so if you can find 1 1/4 inch, that's what you want. So I just cut the end off because you do not want that pin to extend past that retainer. And then this will slide back up into its position. And see, now the ball can move just a little bit. And our grease fitting hole is now aligned. Speaking of the grease fitting, it's 1/4 inch fitting, and you're going to want an angle or 90-degree fitting because this is going to set on the tractor with this facing up, and your fitting is kind of in this direction. So if you put a straight fitting and your hood dog legs right here, you're not going to be able to get a fitting or grease gun on that. So this fitting is actually going to point in that direction. You may have to try a couple to get one that lines up the right direction. I'm going to go ahead and slide that one, or put this one on. So as you see, it's pointing down because this is going to be up. So that's pointing in that direction to where I can come in through here and get the grease gun on. Now, the last piece I could put on here is technically this one. However, I'm going to wait on that for a little while just because it's going to be flopping around. Now this piece here, you're going to want the short side, which is this one, towards the flange. So it will go just like that. Like I say, I'm not going to put that on just yet. So I'm going to set this aside for a second. And we're going to bring out the control valve. Now right now, I have this thing kind of coated in some WD-40. If you have hydraulic oil handy, go ahead and coat it in some hydraulic oil, which I currently do not. So mine will probably get coated with some assembly lube or something here while I'm assembling it. Alright, so this is how your valve is going to set on your tractor. Your inlet and your outlet are going to be towards your center, like towards the tractor itself. On your valve, the larger diameter is going to be towards the cylinder side. Like I say, for me, that's kind of not important, but for you, it is. On these sills, when we install them, you notice they're kind of like a U-shaped, cup shape, however you want to say it. That needs to go towards the inside. So they're both going to go like that. And just put a little bit of oil on these things and put them in. My advice, if you cannot slide it in easily, take a zip tie and just kind of push around the sill to help seat it into place. Okay, once you get that seal down in there, go ahead and install the retainer, which is basically a washer. I'm going to flip it over and do the other side. And be sure you're putting the right seal on the right side. And then your other retainer. So now your seals are installed. Gotta make sure they hold in place as you work it back and forth a little bit. So now we'll bring this piece back over. There's this little, they're calling a spacer, it looks like a washer. That's going to slide onto your center piece first. And you have this big washer. It's a stop washer. Go ahead and slide it in, and it'll sit into the flange. Now you'll take your valve assembly and slide it on. Now go ahead and put on the other two bolts, just so everything stays aligned. Dadgummit. I'm going to take that grease fitting back out because it's in line with one of my bolts. Okay, so now that valve is in alignment. So we're going to put this nut on here. We're going to tighten it all the way down. Against our valve. The manual says to back it off half a turn so that the valve will spin nice and easily without any end play. Well, mine is spinning as it sets with it pushed all the way up against it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back mine off just a quarter turn. So that's how I was setting mine. I ain't going a half, I'm going a quarter turn. So now we're ready to put the cylinder on. So I'm going to need 2 O-rings. Get into my O-ring kits here. See what we need. Okay, I like that. So that is a 3/8 O-ring with a 1/16 cross section. Looks like it's going to be a dash. Be a dash 012 or 012. So then our cylinder they'll just get bolted on. So once you get the cylinder on, go ahead and torque these bolts down to 35 to 50 foot-pounds. And your steering cylinder is now rebuilt. Of course, don't forget to put the grease fitting back into it. And then we still got the ball joint up at the front to put on here, which mine I have somewhat ready, but not completely, so mine's not assembled yet. Okay, so look through the service manual a little bit, and it claims that to set this front ball joint, you want the center of this joint and the center of this joint 5 1/8 of an inch apart. So with that being the case, I can go ahead and install this, get it set up, tightened down, and then I'll be able to paint this joint along with the rest of the cylinder. Which, as you can see, I already painted the clamp, but it'll just get another coat of paint. I'm not too worried about that. So I'm going to go ahead first and just slide the clamp on. About right in there. I'm going to take this joint, and this joint's just been wire wheeled, so it's completely bare. So I'm just going to add some grease to these threads. 1 for lubrication, and 2 to hopefully just keep it from corroding in place, where I can't take it apart in the future if need be. Okay, so I still got to go a little bit more. We're going to set that 1 inch mark right in the center of that joint. The center of this stud, as you can see, is about sitting here at 6 1/8. So we take away our burned inch, we're at 5 1/8. So now I can lock this clamp down, and then this will get painted along with the rest. Now I will tape this area up so this does not have paint on it, because this will slide into the front steering arm. And that front arm I do not have on the tractor just yet, because I didn't want to have to work around it. But once I put this on there, it'll have to be on there. So I'm going to go ahead and take my carriage bolt, slide it down in, along with the lock washer and the nut. And get all this tightened up. I'll be sure to get all this cleaned up really well before I put paint on it. This bolt, just snug it down till your lock washer's crushed, and you put a slight clamp onto the clamp itself. Alright, so there we go. It's ready for paint now. And I will put this on there and get it painted with it. So I gotta tighten it up just a little bit. And like I say, this will be covered, as will that. That bugger's loose. Oh, that's the sleeve. That's not the ball joint. Okay. Yeah, I'll get this. I'll put this cover on here whenever I paint it. Get it good and tight on there as well. And then this will be ready to be put on the tractor.